This is MaineCurrents, independent local news, views, and culture. I'm Amy Brown. It's the third Tuesday of the month, so it's time for our Elections 2020 edition of MaineCurrents with my regular guests, Professor Amy Freed, Chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Maine, and former State Representative Ralph Chapman. We'll have some other folks joining us a little bit later, and we have a lot to go over today, so let's jump right in. And I should mention, by the way, that we are recording this via Zoom on Monday, July 20th. So a lot of things right now happening leading up to Elections 2020. One thing that we haven't talked about at all, and I wanted to just quickly ask both of you about, Ralph and Amy, is the potential vice president picks for Joe Biden. Anybody standing out for either of you? There's a sort of a short list that has been put out by ABC over the weekend of who they think is in the running still. They're saying he's vetting, among others, Senators Kamala Harris of California, Elizabeth Warren, Massachusetts, Tammy Duckworth of Illinois, Representatives Val Demings of Florida, and Karen Bass of California. Also, Susan Rice, who has connections here with Maine, former National Security Advisor for Obama. And he has promised to select a woman and someone who would be ready on day one to be president. He's also getting a lot of encouragement to select a woman of color. So not much specific information out there on where he's leaning. What do you all think?
I do think that it's very likely to end up being a woman of color, which would really only exclude one of the people on that list, which is Elizabeth Warren. There's, of course, other places, though, where Warren could end up being part of an administration, certain cabinet positions, or she might prefer just to, stay in the Senate, which is very important and could change into Democratic-controlled Senate where she'd have more impact. But I think most important thing are those kinds of criteria where, this is an individual who Biden has so much different experience having. He was in the Senate for a long time. He's been vice president, and he really wants a partnership. He wants somebody who's going to add something to the duo that they are, and be someone that he can work with closely with a certain amount of chemistry, and also who really has the competence and expertise so that they could step into the job. Probably of all the ones you mentioned, at least for me, the one I know the least about is this Karen Bass, but she's very interesting. She did have a leadership position in the California legislature. That's a state with 12% of the entire population of the United States. So 1 out of 8 Americans is a Californian. So that's, even though it's that was a state legislative leadership position before coming to Congress, it's not just any state. It's a pretty important state, and she has a very interesting background. But I guess we'll just sort of have to wait and see. I've thought probably Kamala Harris, but I really, obviously I don't know. That's, I think, more of a sense of it early on, that she was someone who could bring a lot to the ticket. And she's also someone I think that he has had a relationship with in the past.
Ralph, do you have any thoughts about this?
Well, I think the Times really, it would be a good opportunity to have a woman of color, because we have not only the pandemic, which has been something brand new to us, but the rise of racial consciousness and the Black Lives Matter movement is something that is, I think, ought to be taken advantage of. That is to say, rather than fight the social changes that are underway, to go with it and to help it along, I think would be a positive step.
How much does geography matter? Some people are saying that he should be trying to pick someone from the Midwest to bring along Trump voters. Do you think that really is a big factor, or should be a big factor in his consideration?
I think it matters less than it did in the past, that our politics is so nationalized these days that it has less of an influence than it would have, in previous times. So I don't think it's really quite as important as it used to be. Maybe for some of the people who are less known, they start out with more of a lead in terms of name recognition for the state that they're from. But, there'll be so much publicity. There's just a few moments, really, there's enormous publicity about a presidential race. And the vice presidential pick, the conventions, and the debates. Those get the most publicity. So there will be just enormous amount of publicity about the VP pick once it happens. A lot of backgrounders and information about the person. And, it's one of those things that hopefully that a campaign has more control over than anything else. They're not making a last minute pick. That's usually true, and I think we certainly are seeing that with the Biden campaign is really taking its time and doing a very careful vetting from everything that we've heard. So that's a long way of answering the question about geography. I think it matters less than it used to.
You agree with that, Ralph, or have an opinion about that at all?
Well, yes, there are various types of divisions in the country. There's the urban versus rural division. There's the north versus the south. There's the coasts versus the midsection of the country, all with their different characteristics. I think the major element of the campaign that's coming up is going to be the one of unification versus the one of divisiveness. And I suspect that since that's the primary underlying topic, I think that the inclusiveness has got to be more inclusive than just picking someone from a particular area of the country.
Susan Rice, there's a really campaign-ready photograph of her and Joe Biden in the White House, and they look like they're kind of leaning against each other, whispering, like they look very serious, but like they look like they're working together on something. It's a good picture if you were going to have a photo for a campaign flyer or something, or for their website. And they're both in the White House, so they're showing that they've had that experience. And she's been the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She served on the National Security Council under Bill Clinton, was Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs within the State Department, as well as being the National Security Advisor under Obama. But she's also associated with Benghazi. So one of the concerns about her is that it gives another opportunity for Benghazi to be brought up. But do you think that anyone who would be considering voting for Biden in the first place would be put off by the specter of Benghazi being raised yet again?
It will be associated with her, probably, that no doubt that would be part of the discussion. It seems like kind of an old issue to me. I don't really know if if it would have that much of an impact. On the other, but what, and Biden may really like Susan Rice. I'm sure he's worked with her closely over the years, but I don't see her as, to me, the best kind of candidate in that she has never run for public office. I mean, I think there's a real plus to picking someone who has electoral experience. It's just not really like anything else. And to just thrust someone into the maelstrom of a presidential campaign, which is so intense, you may not ever be prepared for it if you've never done it before. But I think coming from having an appointed position is really, really different.
Any last thoughts about VP picks before we move on?
My opinion is that it would have been better to have picked a month or so ago rather than not yet. But that's because I think I think the country is hungry for seeing some leadership, and I think it would have given an opportunity for the VP pick to start working on campaigning, and campaigning nowadays is different than it used to be. So I would have given them that added advantage. just an opinion. It's, of course, moot now.
Just under a month before the convention's, watching the clock in about 5 minutes, I believe we're going to be joined by either the independent candidates who are hoping to challenge Susan Collins or representatives from their campaigns. The three of them have joined together, Max Lynn, Tiffany Bond, and Lisa Savage, in issuing a sort of open letter saying that they should all be included in the upcoming debate. So we'll be joined by them. We'll just checking about the upcoming conventions. The Democratic Convention is going to be held in Milwaukee starting August 17th, and the Republican Convention has been moved out of North Carolina because they were going to require some safety public health measures. It got moved to Jacksonville, of all places. Now, Florida is sort of the epicenter of the coronavirus in the country, and they're going to have to take precautions there as well. That one's going to be a week later on August 24th. Why can't these, in their scaling back, the Democratic Convention especially has made note of all of the amount of scaling back that they're doing and how they're not going to have a lot of the festivities you usually would associate with some of these things. Why can't these things be done online? I know, Amy, you've said before, it's all up to the party. There are no, the parties make the rules for their conventions. There aren't any laws saying they have to be there in person. Why can't they be done online? And are the benefits of firing up the most loyal members of the party as important as the risks of potentially getting your most loyal party members sick, or, perhaps even having them die before, well, period, but also before you vote, if you're only thinking in terms of as a politician?
I mean, I think, there's certainly a lot of energy that comes from groups of people coming together. There's a lot of connections people make. There's networking. There's the energy of being in a hall with a live audience. All of that is wonderful. But yeah, in this kind of situation, it doesn't seem like it's a good idea to do very much of that at all. I think that what the Democrats are, one part of what the Democrats are going to do is they're going to have a few hundred people coming, but that's it. They're not going to have all the events. They're going to have a lot of together. They're going to have other things available, panel discussions, a lot of other meetings and things that will be through some kind of Zoom or something like that. But they're not going to have very many people together. But I think they want to have some together, and then I think if they're doing that, they'd be doing that in a socially distant way.
Ralph, do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, this is a time to reinvent ways of doing things. The pandemic is a crisis, and with hundreds of thousands of deaths worldwide, and we need to recalibrate the way we behave in all sorts of ways. And so having a convention has a different meaning now than it had last year or the year before. And I think it's best to realize that and look for innovative ways to invent different mechanisms for accomplishing the goals that were originally set for the old style convention.
Would either one of you go to a convention this year?
No.
I would not. No, I wouldn't. Yeah.
Well, we have Tiffany Bond is with us now, and we have, I believe, possibly someone from Max Lynn's campaign connecting to audio. So we're going to wait, and Lisa Savage will be back with us. So we're going to give them a chance. Oh, there's Lisa. Going to give them a chance to get all their audio on and get connected. And while they're doing that, let's see, I will...
Amy, isn't it important that we recognize that the upcoming election is a ranked choice voted election?
Yes, that's on our list of things that we'll definitely get to. All right, so I don't know, is this Matt Mc...
Yes, it is. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, I got to change my name here.
Okay. Yeah, it says MEH, so I didn't know if that was like a commentary or...
No,
Matt? Oh, and there's these on. Okay. So let me just remind listeners, you're listening to Maine Currents on WERU-FM. This was recorded on Monday, July 20th. And my regular guests that you've been hearing from for this Elections 2020 edition are former State Representative Ralph Chapman and Professor Amy Freed, Chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Maine. Joining us now, we have Matt McDonald, who is, are you the campaign manager for Max Lynn?
I am the senior campaign advisor, spokesperson, all sorts of hats.
Okay. As well, thank you. As well as independent candidates Lisa Savage and Tiffany Bond. They have, Lisa Savage and Max Lynn will be on the ballot running against Susan Collins in November. And Tiffany Bond has filed a lawsuit asking for the signature requirements to be waived, given that in the middle of her gathering signatures, the pandemic hit, and that has created an issue with getting enough signatures to be on the ballot. The three of them have joined together in issuing an open letter demanding inclusion in the upcoming debates. And so let's start there, that this is an open letter, correct? Or is it addressed to anyone in particular? Are there any debates scheduled that you've already been excluded from? And Lisa, you were on I understand Max Lynn just last week, maybe Thursday or Friday, found that he was going to be on the ballot. Tiffany, yours is being litigated. Lisa, you are definitely going to be on the ballot. So
Amy, I don't mean to butt in, but actually Max was on the ballot in May when the Secretary of State validated 4,600 signatures.
That was challenged.
Yeah. And
okay.
So, yeah, no, he's been on the end of May. We delivered them in April, but because of the pandemic, they took some time to validate them. But we were put on the ballot back in May.
Okay.
And
all
then
right.
it was challenged.
And then it was challenged.
Right. So that was going on. So in the meantime, for planning debates, I could see that someone who was planning a debate could try to justify that by saying that only one of the three of you was actually definitely going to be on the ballot. So I'd be interested first to just hear if Lisa, despite the fact that you're on the ballot, you are being excluded, or everybody knew at that time that they were planning up until last week that you were definitely going to be on the ballot. Were you being excluded from debates?
Thanks for the question, Amy, and thanks for having me on. Thank you, Amy and Ralph, and everyone else for being here. Well, we got on the ballot with more than 9,000 signatures that we collected on Super Tuesday, so we weren't worried about ballot access. But of course, we didn't know who the Democratic nominee was going to be. As soon as the primary decided that it would be Sarah Gideon and Susan Collins began exchanging sort of barbs around debates. Both of them had been no-shows for several candidate forums, including one on WERU that we had participated in. And they were sort of challenging each other and doing some kind of trash talk, throwdown kind of stuff about debating and completely ignoring the independent candidates. That to me seems not surprising that they would do that. It's to their advantage to make it seem like it's a two-person race and that we don't have ranked choice voting. But of course we do. Channel 6 has indicated to our press coordinator that they intend to include us in the debates. In fact, intend to include all candidates who are on the ballot in the debates. So I believe it's journalists who really are the arbiters of who's included in debates. It's not the opposing candidates. So I'm not too concerned about what Sarah Gideon and Susan Collins say about it. I'm more concerned about what the news outlets say about, are we going to have free and open debates? The other thing I'm really hopeful of is that we'll have something that, I'm just retiring from 25 years teaching school. One of the things that I really disliked about these televised debates, especially for presidential races, is that they give school students a very distorted image of what a debate is. The kind of debate that I taught was we address a question, we do our research, we come prepared, we give our best points, we listen to the other person's best points, we offer some rebuttals, and in the end, the audience decides kind of who won the debate. I don't think that contests where people sort of get off talking points and insult each other, those don't fit my definition of a debate, so I'm hoping that we have some true debates.
Yeah, when I watch them from home, I'm always wishing that someone in the control booth just turned off the microphones and the people ran out of time. It really would be that simple. Tiffany Bond, you seem to be facing the largest uphill battle in terms of access here with this just being litigated. Do you have any sense of when you're going to have a resolution to your court case?
In the next few weeks. And to be clear, I didn't ask the state to just waive signature requirements entirely. I said, please just hold me to the same standard as the candidates, because the candidates had sort of a regular collection period and their signatures were due on the 16th of March. My signatures were due, I needed twice as many, and I had about twice as long to collect. And the second period was just not functional. So I said, look, you didn't really make any accommodations. I regularly tried to reach out to the state, and you didn't really do anything to help me much. You gave me a few weeks at the end, but it was substantially fewer weeks than we lost, and there were still a whole bunch of issues, some that none anticipated. I mean, the mail, for example, really slowed down. I have pieces that I'm still getting pieces back, and my signatures were turned in on the 1st, and I'm still getting stuff, some of which was postmarked before the 1st of July that I am still getting in the mail. I just have a piece that's going to arrive today. So there was a lot of unanticipated problems, and I don't think that necessarily it was the government's fault. I do think that it was the government's failure to act. So I've just asked for them to please, hold me to the same standard as the party candidates. I've actually turned in substantially more signatures than a party candidate would need. I turned in over 2,700 signatures, and party candidates need 2,000. So I just said, hold me to that standard, since you didn't make any accommodations and you kind of failed to work with me. It is in the judge's hands now. We did have an intervener that there may be responses for, but everything else is turned in. So we wait.
So that could set a precedence for making it easier for independent candidates to get on the ballot in the future. If you
I
win
don't know
this.
that my lawsuit does. I used very specific facts, and I asked for an incredibly narrow ruling. I didn't say, as a rule of thumb, we should have to have the same amount of signatures, though I do believe that, but that's not what I asked for. I said, look, this is an extraordinary year, and I tried in good faith to run a good faith campaign the whole time. I regularly communicated with the Secretary of State's office. I reached out to the governor, who didn't respond, in 2 different formats. And the response I got from the government was essentially, the 4 defendants, was, I was expecting something that said, we looked at our process and we think that we were fair. But instead what I got back was, sorry, you didn't work very hard, and we don't have records of most of your contacts, so maybe you're not being very forthright. And gosh, if more people liked you, it shouldn't have been a problem. So I wasn't expecting that.
I think Professor Amy Fried has a question for you.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that, Maine does have a history of including all candidates who have qualified for the ballot to be on the debate. And so, and I hope Tiffany does, manage to qualify. I've seen her debate in the past personally, and, through the media, she does a great job. But as whoever is on the ballot, certainly that has been the standard. I mean, that's what happened in 2018 when Tiffany was running against Bruce Poliquin. It certainly happened in the Senate race in 2018. It happened in the 1st district race. It's just really a long tradition in Maine, at least that as far as I've seen, pretty consistently. Maybe there's been a few exceptions for all the candidates who are qualified candidates on the ballot to participate. And I think it's certainly important to uphold that tradition in the, as a democratic kind of, value, and also particularly because this is a ranked choice race. And even though I think most people have the expectation that the top 2 candidates will end up being the party candidates, Gideon and Collins, you never know that at this point. We can't guarantee that. And that's, why people adopted ranked choices, so that there would be that kind of capacity. And, the 2018 winner for the U.S. Senate, even though he does caucus with the Democrats, is not didn't hold the Democratic, line. He's an independent Angus King. So we have to include all the candidates. And I would hope that both Gideon and Collins will, support that.
Matthew McDonald, on behalf of the Max Lynn campaign, Are you feeling that your campaign specifically is being excluded from things, from debates and other interview opportunities?
You know, I actually don't. As Lisa pointed out, I mean, Channel 6 has reached out to us, you know, said that they plan on hosting all the candidates. And of course, we were just in that little bit of a legal hearing, and so that kept our attention on a lot of things. But I don't see, as Amy was pointing out, Maine, you know, it would be foreign to Maine politics for them to exclude the independent candidates. If you go even, the professor went back to 2018, but I'm thinking even back in 2012, you know, there's a Blaine Richardson's in running as an independent. They let him go on. You know, there's a number of instances in the last 10 years, if not 20 years, where all the candidates on the ballot were in the discussions and the debates. And
so the impetus for this was just to get out ahead of things. Do you want the public to sign on and support if they agree with you, or?
Well, not only that. I mean, one of the things Max and I and our team have talked about is how much money is going to be spent in this election. I don't know if you've seen the research numbers. Something that, you know, the highest number I've seen is $60 million between the two the two big guys, the two big candidates and their partners, different PACs, 60 million. And you know, to you know, that in itself, you know, one of the things that does is choke out any other voices, whether it be Max or Tiffany or Lisa. And so we need to make sure, and this is where ranked choice voting comes in. This is also where platforms like DRU comes in, and kind of political precedent in Maine saying, wait a second, you guys might spend, you know, 1,500 years wages of an average Maine family in this election, but there are other voices. And so far, people are listening.
Okay. Professor Freed or former State Representative Ralph Chapman, either of you have any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question really perhaps mostly for Tiffany, which has to do with the fairness of the signature collection to get on the ballot. Because this has been a difficulty with independent or more minor party candidates in the past as well. Do you think it would be fair if the number of signatures to be collected were a percentage of, in the case of a minor party candidate, the minor party membership, or in the case of an independent candidate, the unenrolled membership? In other words, on a percentage basis of the population, would that make it fair, or would it be fair if it were a specific number of signatures? So
the point that I've tried to make in both of my runs is that an average middle class person should be able to run. And again, an average resource person should be able to run for office. Though I don't love the signature collection requirement, and if I were personally to change it, I would probably say any candidate should maybe only need like 500, but maybe they personally collect them if we're really trying to show that the candidate themselves have support. Maybe the candidates should have to personally collect them, and it'd be a smaller amount. I think that the 4,000 threshold is high and unpleasant, and it would be a 5-month-long, 40-hour-a-week job with regular, you know, kind of average collection rates, but it's possible. And, you know, why I sued is it became not possible for an average resource person to do it. You would either need to be a millionaire or, you know, Lisa is so fortunate to have the support of the Green Party, but even she had ballot access issues because the Green Party couldn't meet the threshold. So I think that, you know, during regular times, I think it's achievable, although unpleasant. We hit a point where it just wasn't achievable with the pandemic. I mean, the amount of resources it would have taken, I would have needed either a party or to be incredibly wealthy to make it happen. And that puts you in a place where you're no longer talking about whether or not it's fair. That becomes candidate suppression, which is just as bad as voter suppression, in my opinion. I do think we should lower the threshold. I don't think we're going to have a flock of people running for office, because the signature collection component is a fairly big chunk of time, but it's not the only part of running a campaign. So just that alone to get you on the ballot, I don't think we're going to have a flood of people if we say lowered it to 3,000 or made it just 50% more, not double. I do think that we should really address, what are we trying to achieve here? Are we trying to achieve that we just have bona fide candidates who are interested and qualified to run? Or are we just trying to make it hard so there's not too many? And I think that we need to really ask our legislature that question, because I don't think it's been asked recently.
Amy Freed, did you have something you wanted to?
Yeah, I would say that that's a good way of putting it, because there's a balance here between how many people are going to be on the ballot, which is going to require more voter attention, the ability to really go look at the particular candidates. If you had 25 people on a ballot, it'd be very hard to have them all on a debate stage or for people to evaluate them properly. But we also don't want to unduly limit access to the ballot. It's a very valuable piece of political real estate, to put it in crass terms, to actually end up on the ballot. And in the case of this race, there was at one point a more conservative alternative to Susan Collins, who wanted to run in the Republican primary, who was pushed out of the race by the party, from, at least based on, I don't know anything about it except what I read in the paper about it. And so it's a good thing to have somebody, to Collins' right, who at least has a chance now to be on the ballot in the general election, because there's such a range of views, and I know when I talk to colleagues around the country, I'm proud of the Maine political system for allowing really that kind of range, and now having ranked choice voting, so we can have everything from the Green Party to a Max Lynn, and to have the other candidates in between. And maybe I'm not, I don't know, I mean, Matt may describe Lynn in a different way, but I do see him as the most conservative. And that's certainly a part of the Republican Party nationally, and also in Maine, that in a way didn't get a chance to compete at any point previously because of the way that the primary worked out.
Matthew McDonald, did you want to comment on that?
I mean, it's good, if you know anything about Max Lynn's political history, never the same twice. And so, there's all this assumption that Max is going to run to the right of Susan on all the issues and be like President Trump on all the issues. But these are all assumptions. I think many people will be surprised when we release the policy platforms in a couple weeks. And it'll make for important choices. We love ranked choice voting. Max and I at first, and the other team, part of our teams, we had some solid discussions about, do we like it? Are we going to follow the other Republicans, and yada, yada, yada. But it really just came down to a discussion about ice cream, of all things. And I know yesterday or 2 days ago was National Ice Cream Day. And with ranked choice voting, like when you get that type of ice cream where you have vanilla and chocolate and strawberry, it means we can get all three. And if you like pistachio and caramel, you can get that too. And so with Max, I think it's going to be more than just he's to the right of Susan. I believe, when our policies do come out, when we release them through our website, we're gonna sit down and afford the Maine voters something different. And very excited about that.
Well, let's give a minute as we're wrapping up here with this segment. Let's give a minute to the other two candidates, Lisa Savage and Tiffany Bond. Lisa, you had your hand up, so do you want to take a minute with any last thoughts that you have about this, or anything you want to say about your campaign and your platform?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. I was going to say that I can tell there's still a great deal of education to be done around ranked choice voting, even though we've had it in Maine and used it a few times. People are still, now that the primary is over, saying things to our campaign like, how dare you run? You're going to be a spoiler. And it doesn't anger me. It makes me realize, as an educator, more education needs to happen. So we've got a daily video out. Today's theme is ranked choice voting. And we also got the comedian Ron Placone to do a little funny bit on ranked choice voting. I am very lucky to have the Green Party platform behind me. I did not change my heart, my values, or really my, our issues continue to evolve. We've had our issues up on our website for months now, so people can evaluate where we stand, but we continue to refine them to add on. And I do feel very fortunate to have the support of people that want to see a better world and that realize that if we don't address climate change and we don't address public health urgently and with all our resources, that there may not be a future to be worried about. So if people believe as I do, I hope they rank me number 1. If they have another candidate they prefer, I hope they'll consider ranking me number 2. Our website is lisa4maine.org, and we welcome everyone on the team. So thanks for having me on today.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. And if you need any more comedy about ranked choice voting, I have a radio show in which I tried to demonstrate it on the radio a few years ago. Disastrous. Not a good format for that, but video definitely helps. And the League of Women Voters has some great videos and demonstrations on how that works. Tiffany Bond, you get the last word.
There's also a saucy and pretty entertaining knockoff video that was done in Australia about ranked choice voting, if you don't mind a little bit of stepped on Lego language. One of the things that really bothered me about the court's filing is it seemed to treat independents like, oh, we got a couple. So, we don't really need any more. We're good. We got some. It's fine. And I think that if you look at, the policy views, we've got a really nice range here with Matt and Lisa, or it's Max, but, Matt on behalf of Max. It's very diverse. And I think why we issued the joint statement, and I think where you see us really pushing back, is not necessarily that we think we'll be excluded from a couple of televised debates. It would be my expectation that we would be included in those debates. I thought that the TV stations were sort of the most egalitarian of all the coverage that happened in 2018. My concern is that we've got this really fascinating, interesting race with a different process and great spectrum of candidates. I mean, between the 5 of us, we've really got a very healthy range of the political views. And it's not being covered by the media very much. And that's the real tragedy, I think, in this race, is that you see all these articles with just the 2-party candidates, and it's not how the race is, and it's also not how Maine is. So I think that that's what we're really pushing back on, is it is a disservice to Maine, to this election, to not cover that we have fascinating, interesting candidates, and anybody can win. If Donald Trump has proved anything, it's that anybody can win on a long shot. So check all of this out. I'm at bond4.me. I'm really active on Twitter. I answer questions if you ask them to me there. My handle is @TiffanyBond, and I also have 2 digital town hall events per week, one Tuesday evenings, one Saturday mornings.
Matthew McDonald, you did not get your website in there. Do you want to quickly say where you are online?
We're just about to launch it. And so it's not up. Our social media team is working on that right now. We wanted to make sure everything was secure with the Secretary of State before we went full board. But it'll be maximumforsenate.com once it's up.
Okay, great.
And so, I just maybe repeat.
Okay, you got to go before the other 2, so just very quickly. So don't.
Okay, no, I just wanted to first of all, repeat what both Lisa and Tiffany were saying. We have such a spread of political thought here. Really, what a gift it is for Maine. No other state gets to have this. We could have all the flavors, and we can vote, and we can use ranked choice voting.
And very noteworthy to see the range of all of you with your political beliefs joining together to sign this letter. Yes, and that's what a benefit. And I really appreciate Lisa and Tiffany. They've communicated with myself and our campaign. People have all sorts of thoughts about what kind of campaign we're going to run. Our campaign is going to be a positive campaign. We have some policy differences between everyone. We're going to stick to our policies, and I think for us not to get involved in the multi-million-dollar mudslinging will be beneficial to the independents. All right. Well, let's leave it there because we're out of time for this segment. But thank you very much for joining us. And you don't have a website yet. Do you know what your website's going to be?
It'll be maxlinforsenate.com.
Okay, great. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You're listening to MaineCurrents on WERU-FM, and we're back with our regular guests in this election 2020 edition, Professor Amy Fried and former state representative Ralph Chapman. Ralph, right before we went to that segment, you were starting to bring up ranked choice voting. I'm going to let you kick that subject off because there's a lot to be said about that as pertains to this upcoming election in November.
Sure, and we just heard one example of an advantage to ranked choice voting, which is we just heard from 3 candidates who have very different political views, who are collaborating on trying to get exposure to the public to advance their views in a civil and pleasant way. As contrasted to the non-ranked choice voting system in which it's to one's advantage to be as negative as possible towards one's opponents. And I'm crediting ranked choice voting for this because on account of ranked choice voting, as Lisa said, if you don't want to vote for me as for number 1, please vote for me as your number 2 choice. In other words, just because you might not, your success in a ranked choice vote is dependent upon appealing to a large number of people, including those who might not prefer you as their first choice. And consequently, it's not to your advantage to try to tear down a person who might be someone's first choice if you might be their second choice. And I think we saw a very specific example of how ranked choice voting is helping our electoral system just in the last few minutes with those 3 candidates.
Well, and it's interesting to hear the representative for the Max Lynn campaign, because he is a conservative, complimenting that process, because the Republicans, for reasons that are unknown to anyone, have decided that somehow ranked choice voting is an anti-Republican thing, which does not, there's no evidence to support that. And even to the extent where right now the Secretary of State's office in Maine this morning picked back up with counting the potential challenger votes in ranked choice voting, or the potential challengers for Jared Golden, even though the 2 that had Dale Crafts, the front runner, had just under 50% of the votes. Adrian Bennett, the former spokesperson, communications director for LePage, and Eric Brakey, former state representative or senator. I think he was a state representative. Anyway, the 2 of them got fewer votes, are still in play because of ranked choice voting. The ranked choice voting count is still going on because that's what it was promoted as. The voters got to vote that way. But the Adrian Bennett and Eric Brakey have both tried to pull out to make a stand against ranked choice voting, even though one of them could potentially become the candidate. And it'll be interesting to see what they actually do if it turns out that they are the ones through ranked choice voting that got the nomination. Will they actually step away because they don't believe in ranked choice voting?
It's not up to candidates at this point whether they're going to win that election. It was up to the voters. The voters went, they voted. They either used ranked choice or they didn't. They could have decided just to bullet vote for one person. But it's not up to them at this point who has that prime piece of political real estate, the ballot line. It's up to the voters. And if 2 of them were to drop out, let's say Adrian Bennett ends up winning after the ranked choice tally. Even if she dropped out, there's no legal way that you can just stick Dale Crafts in there unless it is declared to be an empty slot that then the party has the right to fill. But it can't just be the 2 of them drop out and then one person says, oh, I'll take it. Now, I would think if Bennett wins and she decides to drop out, that the party would pick Dale Crafts. But that's how it would have to work, because you can't just have an election and then have somebody jump in and claim that they won the election. It's, it's up to the voters to use the process established under the law.
If they don't have to participate, if they don't want to, they can just only vote for one person. No one has to rank all 3.
Exactly. And it is, I have been a little bothered by how partisan it's become, because ranked choice voting's been used over 100 years in Australia. It is not something that tends to benefit one side or another in terms of liberal, conservative, whatever. But I know we have this whole history in Maine because there was a lot of discussion of it after LePage won, and I think that's how they see it. And plus the Poliquin example, made it even more disliked. I would agree with what Lisa Savage said earlier, that there could be more education about this, because I had several people say to me, this was actually before the vote last Tuesday, that just based on the polling that was out about the second district. What if no one wins a majority because there's the three of them and a lot of people don't rank? And so what's going to happen? And I had to go through and explain that if you still would have the situation with three people where the last person is excluded from the next tally, and then you see how many, did pick someone else, the supporters for that third place candidate, and you redistribute however many there are, and then you have a new denominator in the fraction, and you have a majority of that. So there's always going to be a majority, but it's going to be a majority of a different group, just like there is if you have a sort of the more typical runoff election rather than instant runoff, where the typical runoff would be you have an election and then maybe like 2 weeks or a month later, you have the ability of people to come back and vote a second time. You never have the same exact number of people voting between the first and the second. It's usually fewer people at the second time with that kind of runoff. And the same thing is true with ranked choice. And I think it might be time for another round of education about it. And I also think that nationally, there's very little understanding about how this is going to be used in Maine, because I talk to national reporters probably weekly, and I tell all of them, Maine has ranked choice voting, and that could have an impact on what happens. And most of their questions are about the U.S. Senate race.
Well, and also we'll be the first state in the country using it in the presidential elections in the fall, because the Republicans lost their latest challenge also last week. That was announced.
They didn't have enough signatures. There were a whole set of problems with the signatures that they submitted. Right.
So, yeah, some of them were found to not be registered voters. Some of them had signed more than one petition. But do they can go back to the drawing board with that again, but not in time for the November elections? Is that correct?
They cannot bring this people's veto at this point, because it's unless this somehow they manage to get the signatures to be qualified, like the court says, no, these shouldn't have been disqualified. People's veto, which is what they were trying to do, they cannot do anymore, because that has to be, the signatures have to go in a certain number of days after the end of the legislative session. And it's too long now. So they could bring another ballot initiative, but that wouldn't be for this fall.
Okay, I want to quickly, before we run out of time today, also get your impression, and you may be the first one who wants to jump in on this one, Ralph Chapman, former state representative, of what's happening with the state legislature. They, last week, I believe it was, the Democrats the Democratic leadership put out a poll asking the Republicans if they felt comfortable coming back, and the legislature was going to meet in the Augusta Civic Center, where there'd be spacing would be easier to do. They'd come back in August and apparently just deal with things that were really pressing matters that needed to be dealt with in a shorter session. And all but, I believe it was 3 or 4 Republicans refused to even respond to the poll.
You have it just slightly off, Amy. The polling is done by the party leadership for their caucus members per the Constitution of the state. And this has to do with how do you call the legislature back into a special session. And there are a couple of ways. One way is the governor can call the legislature back in. The governor is not choosing to do so as yet. The other way is for the legislature to call themselves back in, but to do so, they need a majority vote of each caucus to be able to do so. By each caucus, I mean each party caucus, not the caucuses within the two houses, the House and Senate, two chambers of the legislature. But in other words, all of the Republicans in the House and Senate are the Republican caucus. All the Democrats in the House and Senate are the Democratic caucus. And when I was there, all of the Green Party members, which was Representative Henry Bair and myself, in both the House and Senate, were a third caucus. And in order for the legislature to call a special session requires a majority vote of each of those caucuses. at the present time, there are only two parties represented in the Maine's legislature. So it's only a polling that has to happen by the Republican leadership of the Republican caucus and by the Democratic leadership of the Democratic caucus. And those votes determine whether the legislature is reconvened. As I say, the Republicans appear to be trying to force limitations on what types of legislation will be brought to bear when they reconvene. And so as a political pressure tactic is refusing apparently to agree to come back into a special session. Of course, there's a question as to whether once the legislature reconvenes, it can't be prohibited from doing whatever it wants to do. So to me, that's not a very good argument. That is to say, it's not an argument that can be enforced. At the same time, if the Republicans feel that anytime they come back into session, it's going to go badly for them, and they choose not to, the governor could call them back into session regardless of this polling that happens within the legislature. So that's just how the system is working. Now, when I was there, there's another side story, which I don't think we need to go into at the moment, but a very dark side underbelly of the process was put forward to keep my vote from counting as to whether or not we went into a special session.
And you were an independent when you were an independent?
No, I was a Green member at the time. Henry Bear and I were the two Green Party members, and actually since we needed a majority of us to agree to a special session, either one of us had, in essence, a controlling vote for whether the legislature would come back into session. However, there was some activity that went to undermine that. And I guess at the moment, I'm happy to discuss it, but it is in the past, and it brings up some very unsavory aspects of how the legislative process works.
Can you, I know Amy wants to jump in here. I'd like to, if you could though, just in this, give us any kind of, if we don't have time to get into the whole story today, hopefully we will at some point, but in just a couple of minutes, is there a sort of a snapshot of any lessons you can take from that for what might be happening today? And then I also want to give Amy a chance to weigh in on this as well.
Well, the lesson is that the parties have, in my opinion, too much power. And you mentioned the Republicans not liking ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting clearly takes power away from the major parties. The Democrats also worked very hard, in fact, eliminated ranked choice voting during the special session that was called. I did agree to it at the time. It was a very difficult choice that I made to do so because I knew that the special sessions are when a lot of skullduggery can happen in the legislature, and did. And it was a time when ranked choice voting was eliminated by the democratically controlled legislature at the time. So the Republicans differ from the Democrats on their opposition to ranked choice voting only in that the Republicans are explicit about it and the Democrats are hypocritical about it. The I'm talking about the State House leadership, not the party leadership, which publicly was in favor of ranked choice voting. But the State House leadership had to flip 15 caucus member votes in order to get rid of it. And that was an underreported story because it happened during a special session. It happened at night, and you know it was filled with procedural things that made it messy, and so it was not well understood.
Well, we have just about 3 minutes left, so Amy, a lot there to weigh in on. I'll let you decide where to start.
Well, I think that's a good point about ranked choice, where it isn't as clear cut as a lot of times we express it. one of the things that was really interesting to me that Ralph said that I think is very important to keep in mind is that the legislature probably can't be limited in what it's doing if it comes back. And a lot of different things could happen. I view the whole discussion about this, through somewhat of a political lens, in particular thinking about how it plays with the Senate race, because, Sarah Gideon obviously is the Speaker of the House, and before the legislature, ended, they did pass some things related to COVID. They had a package, not a huge amount of things, but they passed some things. And then, they went out, and then now you have a message from the Collins campaign that Gideon has basically gone on vacation and doesn't care about what's going on with COVID, which, I'm sure she's doing some other things that we're not necessarily seeing publicly, but that's been their message. And then now you have Republicans in the legislature are blocking them returning, and it just complicates that message. From the Gideon side, they're saying, well, you've been saying we can't, we shouldn't, Gideon hasn't been doing anything. They let the legislature convene, go out, and now, but look at what's going on now. So I think it's got to be, if anybody is following this out in the main public, and it's always hard to know how much these kind of machinations people are following, it's got to be incredibly confusing. It makes for really muddled messages, and you don't know how much is politics on either side of what they're doing. Ralph probably has more of a sense of it because he's been more on the inside of these things and can follow some of the details, in a way that, like, even though I'm a political scientist, I can't and quite understand everything that's going on. But I do see it as part of this kind of political back and forth between the Collins campaign and Gideon, and then now it's like, what is going on? Because, and Troy Jackson, the Senate president, is saying to the Collins campaign, I've seen him quoted as saying, we have to, you said that Gideon's not doing anything, but you're not letting us come back. So there's the politics there.
And so much to go into, so much for next time. And this is a time when people are completely overwhelmed. With so many other things going on, such a historically important election coming up, and so many pieces, nuanced bits of it that you're describing there, and so much more. And we'll just keep talking about it and trying to do the best we can from this end, but that is all we have time for today. Thanks for joining me again, Professor Amy Fried, Chair of the Political Science Department at University of Maine, and former State Representative Ralph Chapman. I'm Amy Brown. Join me for MaineCurrents, independent local news, views, and culture on the first and third Tuesdays of each month at 4 o'clock. And this third Tuesday edition with these two special guests is dedicated to our Elections 2020 coverage. You can reach me at news@weru.org with any questions, comments, or feedback, and listen to or download our archive shows at weru.org and on the WERU app. Stay tuned for Let's Talk About It with Patricia McLean coming up next here on Community Radio, WERU FM.